Some connections are not planned. They are composed in the quiet moments when two broken souls find harmony in the darkness. This is a story about a woman who had forgotten how to dream and a man who had forgotten how to feel. Until one winter night, when music became the language their hearts had been searching for all along, the snowstorm came without warning, transforming the mountain roads into sheets of ice within minutes. Natalia Rivera clutched the steering wheel of her dying sedan, her knuckles white as the windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the blizzard. 29 years old, with dark auburn hair now plastered to her face from melting snow, and hazel eyes that had seen too much sorrow for someone so young. Her car sputtered once, twice, then died completely on the deserted road. Through the whiteout, she could barely make out the silhouette of a massive building perched on the hillside. With no phone signal and temperatures dropping rapidly, she had no choice but to seek shelter. The Windermere Grand Hotel loomed before her like a sleeping giant. Natalia pushed through the heavy oak doors, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The entrance hall stretched before her in shadows, grand and abandoned. Scaffolding lined the walls, drop cloths covered furniture, and construction equipment sat silent in corners. The place was clearly mid-renovation, but more importantly, it appeared completely deserted. She called out, her voice echoing off marble floors and high ceilings, but only silence answered. Her teeth chattered as she ventured deeper into the building, looking for any source of warmth, any sign of life. Then she saw it. Beyond an archway, in what must have been the grand ballroom, a single spotlight illuminated a piano. Not just any piano, but a magnificent Steinway grand, its black lacquer surface gleaming like liquid midnight. It stood alone in the center of the empty room, untouched by the renovation chaos, as if waiting. Natalia felt her heart constrict. She had not touched a piano in 2 years, not since she sold her beloved instrument to pay for her younger brother's cancer treatments. Not since she watched him slip away despite everything she sacrificed. Music had been her entire world once, but after losing him, the notes felt like memories too painful to bear. But now, frozen and alone in this strange place, something pulled her forward. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the fallboard, revealing the ivory keys beneath. She sat on the bench, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably, and for a long moment simply stared at her hands. Then, as if moved by something beyond conscious thought, she began to play. What emerged was not a composed piece, but pure emotion, given sound. Every note carried the weight of her grief. The exhaustion of working 3 jobs to pay off medical debts, the loneliness of a life stripped bare. The melody was haunting, mournful, yet threaded with fragile hope, like a prayer whispered into the void. The music filled the ballroom, transforming the cold, empty space into something sacred. What Natalia did not know was that she was not alone. Damian Cross stood in the shadows near the mezzanine level, having heard the door open from his private office suite upstairs. He had descended quietly to investigate the intruder. But the moment her fingers touched those keys, he became rooted to the spot. At 35, Damian was a man who had built walls so thick around his heart that he barely remembered what genuine emotion felt like. Tall and broad-shouldered, with coal-black hair and steel-gray eyes, he had transformed failed properties into luxury destinations across the country. The Windermere was his most ambitious project yet. His attempt to resurrect the hotel where his mother had worked as a housekeeper before illness took her when he was just a boy. He poured everything into his work, because work could not abandon you, could not die and leave you shattered. But this music, this unexpected symphony of sorrow and strength, cracked something inside him. He watched the woman at the piano, her profile illuminated by the spotlight. He felt his carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. He saw her pain in every movement, heard her story in every phrase, and recognized a kindred spirit. Another person who had lost everything and was trying desperately to find a reason to keep going. For 15 minutes he stood transfixed, and when she finally played the last note, letting it fade into silence, he found himself walking toward her before his mind could intervene. Natalia sensed his presence and spun around, her hand flying to her chest. Her heart hammered as she took in the man approaching from the shadows, tall and imposing, his expression unreadable. She scrambled to her feet, words tumbling out in a rush of apology. She explained about the storm, the broken-down car, the unlocked door, how she thought the building was empty. She promised she meant no harm, that she would leave immediately if he wanted. But Damian raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. His voice when he spoke was rough, as though he had not used it in some time. "Don't apologize," he said quietly. "That was the most honest thing I've heard in years." Her eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Natalia saw beyond his austere exterior to the loneliness underneath. Damian saw beyond her disheveled appearance to the artist who had bared her soul through music. The air between them seemed to hum with unspoken recognition. He introduced himself as the owner, told her the hotel was closed for renovations, but she was welcome to stay until the storm passed. Then he paused, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes, and made a decision that would change both their lives. "I have a proposition," Damian said, his voice carrying a weight that made Natalia's breath catch. "This hotel reopens in 2 months. I want it to be more than just luxury accommodations. I want it to offer something real, something that touches people." He gestured toward the piano. "What you just played, that authenticity, that raw emotion, that's what I want here. Stay. Be the heart of this place. Play for guests when we open. Teach if you want. Make this piano sing the way you just did." Natalia stared at him, certain she had misheard. This stranger, this enigmatic man who appeared from nowhere, was offering her not just shelter from the storm, but a lifeline back to the world she thought she had lost forever. Her logical mind screamed that this was impossible, that people did not make such offers to complete strangers. But something deeper, some instinct she had learned to trust through years of interpreting music, told her that Damian Cross understood loss the way she did. That he recognized in her something he had been searching for without knowing it. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You don't even know me." Damian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I heard you play. That tells me everything I need to know." He extended his hand toward her, and Natalia realized this was more than a business offer. This was to damaged people standing at a crossroads, being given a chance to heal through an unlikely connection. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. But inside this vast, empty ballroom, with only a piano and 2 strangers who suddenly did not feel like strangers at all, something was beginning. Something neither of them could name yet, but both desperately needed. Natalia looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his eyes, those stormy gray eyes that held shadows and secrets. She thought about her empty apartment, her mountain of debts, her colorless existence of survival rather than living. She thought about how the piano had felt beneath her fingers after 2 years of silence, how the music had poured out of her like a dam breaking. And she thought about the inexplicable pull she felt toward this man, a stranger who somehow saw her when she had felt invisible for so long. She reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real, and in that simple touch both of them felt it, a spark of something that would either save them or consume them entirely. The snowstorm outside was just beginning, but the storm between them, the one that would append everything they thought they knew about themselves, had already started. And neither of them had any idea just how deeply this night would change the course of their lives. How a chance encounter would become an obsession neither could resist. The following weeks unfolded like a dream Natalia kept expecting to wake from. Damian arranged for her car to be repaired and offered her a suite on the 3rd floor overlooking the snow-covered mountains. Every morning she woke to the sounds of construction, saws buzzing and hammers pounding as the hotel transformed around her. But the ballroom remained untouched, a sanctuary where she spent hours each day reacquainting herself with the piano. Remembering who she used to be before grief consumed everything, Damian was always nearby. She would feel his presence before seeing him, that magnetic pull that made her skin tingle with awareness. He would stand in doorways watching her practice, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. Sometimes he brought her coffee without being asked, somehow knowing exactly how she took it. Other times he simply listened, and in those moments of shared silence, Natalia felt more understood than she had in years. There was something deeply intimate about being witnessed in her most vulnerable, creative moments. about having this intense man absorb every note she played as if committing her soul to memory. Their conversations began cautiously, like two wounded animals circling each other. Over simple dinners in the hotel's skeletal kitchen, they traded fragments of their stories. Natalia spoke of her brother's battle with leukemia, how she had quit the symphony orchestra to care for him, how music became impossible after his death because every melody reminded her of playing at his bedside. Damian listened with such focused attention that she felt truly heard for the first time since her loss. When she cried, he did not offer empty platitudes, but simply moved his chair closer, his presence a solid anchor in her storm of grief. In return, Damian revealed pieces of himself he had never shared with anyone. He told her about growing up in poverty, about watching his mother work herself to exhaustion cleaning rooms in the original Windermere Hotel, how she would bring him here on her breaks, letting him glimpse a world of elegance they could never afford. How she died when he was 14, leaving him with nothing but a fierce determination to never be powerless again. He built his empire not from greed, but from a desperate need to prove that he mattered, that he could create beauty in a world that had shown him mostly hardship. As he spoke, Natalia saw past the stoic exterior to the frightened boy still seeking his mother's approval. Still trying to make meaning from senseless loss, the attraction between them grew like a tide, inevitable and overwhelming. Natalia found herself thinking about him constantly, noticing details like how he rolled up his sleeves when concentrating on blueprints, revealing forearms corded with muscle. How his rare smiles transformed his severe features into something breathtaking. How his voice dropped lower when they were alone, intimate and warm. She caught herself wondering what those strong hands would feel like on her skin, what it would be like to kiss that serious mouth until it softened beneath hers. The thoughts both thrilled and terrified her. She had not felt desire like this since before her world fell apart, and trusting those feelings felt like stepping off a cliff. Damian was equally affected. He became hyper-aware of everything about Natalia. The way she tucked hair behind her ear when nervous, how she hummed unconsciously while walking through hallways, the small scar on her left wrist from a childhood accident. He memorized the constellation of freckles across her nose, the precise shade of gold in her hazel eyes. He found excuses to be near her, reviewing construction plans in the ballroom while she practiced, asking her opinion on design choices he could easily decide himself. At night, he lay awake thinking about the curve of her neck as she bent over the keys, the graceful strength in her musician's hands. He wanted her with an intensity that should have alarmed him, but instead felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking through life. The turning point came 6 weeks after her arrival. Natalia was in the ballroom practicing a Chopin nocturne when Damian entered carrying champagne and 2 glasses. His expression was troubled, and she immediately stopped playing. He poured them each a glass with uncharacteristic nervousness, then told her that his ex-fiancée, Victoria Ashford, had called. She wanted to meet, claiming she had made a mistake ending their engagement 3 years ago. The news hit Natalia like a physical blow. She had not even known he had been engaged, had assumed his solitary nature meant he had always been alone. Jealousy flared hot and unexpected in her chest. Damian saw the emotion flash across her face, and something shifted in his expression. He set down his glass and crossed to where she sat frozen on the piano bench. He told her that Victoria had left because she found his intensity suffocating, because he worked too much and felt too little. But he knew now that was a lie. He had not been capable of real feeling back then because he had been protecting himself from ever being hurt again. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper as he confessed that everything changed the night he heard Natalia play. That she had somehow bypassed every defense he had built, made him feel things he thought he was incapable of feeling. That the thought of her leaving terrified him more than anything. In his carefully controlled life, Natalia's heart raced as she stood to face him fully. They were inches apart now, close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. She asked what he was saying, needing to hear him speak it plainly, despite knowing the answer in her bones. Damian's hands came up to cup her face with surprising gentleness, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He said he was falling in love with her, that maybe he had been falling since that first night, that she made him want to be brave enough to feel again despite the risk. The vulnerability in his admission broke something open inside Natalia. She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring 2 years of loneliness and grief and desperate hope into the press of her lips against his. For a heartbeat, Damian froze in surprise. Then he was kissing her back with an intensity that stole her breath. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him as he deepened the kiss. It was not gentle or tentative, but raw and honest. Two people who had survived the worst life could offer, finding solace in each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natalia saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. Neither of them had expected this, but neither could deny the rightness of it. The next 2 weeks existed in a bubble of happiness. Natalia had thought she would never experience again. She and Damian became inseparable, stealing kisses between contractor meetings, sharing meals and stories, and slowly healing wounds. He taught her about hotel management and design, his passion for creating beautiful spaces. She taught him to hear the emotion in different composers, to understand how music could express what words could not. They stayed up late talking about their dreams, the life they might build together once the hotel opened. For the first time since her brother's death, Natalia allowed herself to imagine a future filled with something other than pain. But the universe has a way of testing. Newfound happiness. Natalia's phone rang early one morning with a number she had not seen in 5 years. Her father. The man who abandoned her and her mother when Natalia was 12, missed her brother's entire illness and death, was suddenly calling as if no time had passed. He was in town, he said, and wanted to see her. The shock left her speechless. When Damian found her sitting motionless with the phone in her hand, he did not push for explanations, but simply held her until she could form words again. She told him about her father's abandonment, about the anger and abandonment she had carried for years. Part of her wanted to refuse the meeting, to let him feel the same rejection he had given her. But another part, the part that had learned something about forgiveness from loving Damian, wondered if closure might set her free. Damian offered to come with her, but Natalia knew this was something she needed to face alone. They met at a cafe in town, and when her father walked in looking older and smaller than she remembered, Natalia felt her prepared anger waver. He told her he was dying, that cirrhosis from years of drinking had finally caught up with him. He was not asking for forgiveness, he said, because he knew he did not deserve it. But he wanted her to know that leaving was the biggest mistake of his life, that he thought about her and her brother every day, that his cowardice had cost him everything that mattered. The apology was 15 years too late, but hearing it still cracked something in Natalia's chest. She realized that holding on to her anger had only been hurting herself, keeping her trapped in the past. Her father's actions were his burden to carry, not hers. She told him about her brother's death, about the music she had lost and found again, about Damian and the unexpected second chance at happiness she had been given. Her father cried, grieving the grandson he never knew and the daughter he had abandoned. When they parted, Natalia did not say she forgave him because she was not sure she did, but she said she hoped he found peace and meant it. Walking back to the hotel, she felt lighter somehow, as if releasing that old resentment had created space for something better. She found Damian waiting anxiously in the lobby and fell into his arms, grateful beyond words for his steady presence. He asked if she was okay, and for the first time in years, Natalia could honestly say yes. That night in the ballroom, Natalia played for Damian with her whole heart. Not the sorrowful melodies of grief, but something new, composition that spoke of healing and hope and the courage it takes to love again. Damian watched her with such adoration that she felt beautiful and whole, despite all her scars. When the last note faded, he crossed to the piano and knelt beside the bench. He took her hands in his and told her that he knew it was fast, that logic said they barely knew each other. But logic had never made his heart race like this, had never made him want to be a better man. He asked if she could see a future with him, not just professionally, but in every way. If she could imagine building a life together, creating something beautiful from the broken pieces they had both been carrying. Natalia looked into those storm-gray eyes and saw her own hope reflected back. She thought about how far she had come from that desperate woman who stumbled into this hotel during a blizzard. How Damian had not just offered her a job, but had seen her, truly seen her, when she felt invisible to the world. How he had held space for her grief while showing her that joy was still possible. How loving him had taught her that opening your heart again after loss was not betrayal but the bravest thing you could do. She whispered yes, and Damian's face transformed with a smile so pure it took her breath away. He pulled her into his arms, and they stayed there on the ballroom floor, holding each other as if they could merge into one being. Two damaged souls who had somehow found their way to wholeness through each other. But even as they clung to their happiness, neither knew that the universe had one more test waiting. One more trial that would either cement their bond or shatter it beyond repair. The morning began like any other, Natalia waking in Damian's arms as early spring sunlight filtered through the windows. The hotel opening was just 3 weeks away, and excitement buzzed through the building like electricity. The staff Damian had hired were beginning their training. The restaurant kitchen gleamed with new equipment, and the guest rooms had been transformed into sanctuaries of understated luxury. The ballroom where Natalia would perform nightly was complete. The piano positioned perfectly for acoustics, surrounded by intimate seating arrangements that would make every performance feel personal. Everything was falling into place exactly as they had dreamed. Then Natalia's phone rang. The hospital. Her father had been brought in unconscious, his liver finally failing. He was asking for her. Damian insisted on driving her, his hand firm and reassuring in hers as they navigated morning traffic. At the hospital, a tired doctor explained that her father had days at most, that his body was shutting down. Natalia felt oddly numb as she entered his room. The man in the bed looked nothing like the father she remembered. His skin yellowed, his breathing labored, but his eyes, when they found hers, held a clarity she had not seen at their cafe meeting. He apologized again, his voice barely audible, but this time Natalia stopped him. She told him she forgave him, and realized as she spoke that she meant it. Forgiveness was not about what he deserved, but about freeing herself from the weight of resentment. Her father smiled weakly and asked about her music. Natalia found herself talking about the hotel, about rediscovering her passion for piano, about Damian and the life they were building. Her father listened with tears streaming down his face, telling her he was grateful she had found happiness despite everything he had taken from her. He made her promise to keep playing, to never let grief steal her music again. Then, with visible effort, he asked if Damian was there. When Natalia brought him in, her father took Damian's hand with surprising strength and asked him to take care of his daughter, to be the man he had failed to be, to not run when things got difficult. Damian promised, his voice thick with emotion, and Natalia saw a new respect pass between them. 2 hours later, with Natalia holding his hand, her father slipped away peacefully. The grief was different this time. Not the crushing, suffocating pain she had felt when her brother died, but something gentler. Sadness mixed with relief, loss mixed with closure. Damian held her through the tears, never once telling her how to feel or suggesting she should move on. He simply bore witness to her pain and reminded her she was not alone. In the days that followed, as Natalia arranged a simple funeral and sorted through her father's meager belongings, she leaned on Damian's strength. But she also discovered her own. The music that had abandoned her after her brother's death stayed with her this time. She found herself playing through her grief, composing melodies that honored both the brother she had adored and the father she had barely known. The piano became not an escape, but a tool for processing, for healing, for remembering that beauty could coexist with sorrow. The hotel opening was postponed by a week out of respect, but Natalia insisted they not cancel. Her father's last words had been about her music, and she wanted to honor that. On opening night, the Windermere Grand Hotel blazed with lights against the mountain darkness. Guests arrived in elegant attire, exclaiming over the restored grandeur, the impeccable service, the attention to detail in every corner. But the true centerpiece was the ballroom, where Natalia sat at the Steinway in a deep blue gown, her hair swept up, looking every inch the concert pianist she used to be. Damian stood at the back watching her, his heart so full it ached. This woman who had stumbled into his life, broken and desperate, had become his entire world. When Natalia began to play, the room fell silent. She had chosen her program carefully, pieces that told a story of loss and redemption, of falling apart and being put back together. The music swelled through the ballroom, rich and complex and devastatingly honest. Guests sat transfixed, many with tears streaming down their faces, moved by the raw emotion she channeled through her fingers. This was not just performance, but communion, one human sharing the depths of her experience with others. When the final note rang out, there was a moment of breathless silence before applause erupted. People stood, wiping their eyes, calling for an encore. But Natalia only had eyes for Damian at the back of the room, his face shining with pride and love. After the guests dispersed, gushing their compliments and booking future stays specifically to hear her play again, Natalia found Damian on the balcony overlooking the mountains. He pulled her into his arms, telling her she was magnificent, that she had given everyone in that room a gift they would never forget. Natalia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. She told him that none of this would have been possible without him, that he had saved her in ways he could not imagine. Damian shook his head and said they had saved each other, that she had taught him how to feel again, how to open his heart despite the risk. They stood together under the stars, two people who had been through hell and somehow found heaven in each other's arms. In the months that followed, the Windermere became known not just for its luxury, but for its soul. Guests came from across the country to experience Natalia's nightly performances, to take piano lessons from her during the day, to participate in the music therapy sessions she began offering. The hotel thrived beyond Damian's projections, but more importantly, it became a place of healing. People who were grieving, who were lost, who needed beauty to remind them that life was still worth living, found solace within its walls. Natalia and Damian built something together that was bigger than either of them, a sanctuary where broken things could be made whole. On their first anniversary, Damian took Natalia back to the ballroom where they had met. He had arranged for the room to be filled with candles, their glow making the space feel magical. He told her that a year ago he had been half alive, going through the motions of existence without really living. Then she appeared playing piano in the darkness, and everything changed. He dropped to one knee, producing a simple platinum band set with a single perfect diamond. He asked her to marry him, to continue building this beautiful life they had created, to be his partner in every sense of the word. Natalia's answer was yes before he finished speaking. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him deeply. Tasting salt from happy tears on both their lips, they married 6 months later in the ballroom. Surrounded by staff who had become family and guests who had become friends, Natalia wore a simple ivory gown and carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Damian looked at her like she hung the moon, as they exchanged vows, promising to hold each other through whatever storms came. Natalia thought about the night she had stumbled into this place, desperate and alone. She thought about how sometimes the worst moments in life deliver you to the best ones, how loss can teach you to recognize love when it appears. She thought about her brother, who would have loved seeing her this happy, and her father, who had lived long enough to know she would be okay. And she thought about Damian, this unexpected gift of a man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her. Anyway, their first dance was to a waltz Natalia had composed, a melody that spoke of snow and pianos and two lonely people finding home in each other. As they swayed together, Damian whispered that she was the best thing that ever happened to him. Natalia smiled against his chest and said he had given her back her music, but more than that, he had given her back herself. They had both been broken when they met, shattered by life's cruelties and resigned to loneliness. But together, they had created something whole and beautiful, proving that healing was possible, that second chances were real, that love could grow even in the darkest soil. Years passed, and the Windermere flourished. Natalia continued to play nightly, her music evolving as she grew and healed. She and Damian expanded the hotel's music program, offering scholarships to talented young musicians who could not afford training. They created a foundation in her brother's name to help families facing medical hardships. They built a life filled with purpose and passion and the kind of deep partnership that only comes from truly seeing and accepting each other. On difficult days when grief resurfaced or old wounds ached, they held each other and remembered how far they had come. Natalia, never forgot the scared woman who had played piano in an empty ballroom, hoping for just one night of shelter from the storm. That woman had been lost, but in being lost, she had found her way to exactly where she needed to be. She had learned that sometimes you have to break completely before you can rebuild stronger. That vulnerability is not weakness, but the gateway to real connection. That the people who see you at your worst and stay are the ones worth keeping. And most importantly, that music, like love, has the power to transform darkness into light. On quiet nights, when the hotel was peaceful and guests were settled in their rooms, Natalia and Damian would sit together in the ballroom. Sometimes she would play for him, the private concerts that were theirs alone. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. They had both thought they were beyond saving, but they had been wrong. Love had found them when they least expected it and most needed it, proving that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone. Some storms bring destruction, but others, like that blizzard so many years ago, bring exactly what we need to survive. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, what starts as simple survival becomes a reason to truly live.